Oh my god, I read some thick books. That's enough of that. Hi everyone. I haven't done one of these in quite a while, but I wanted to do a recent reads, just like quick fire reviews of all the books that I've read in the past couple of months. So I'll try to go straight into it. The first 3 books, I did read them during a 24-hour readathon, so I will link that video here because it'll have my initial reactions. So I think the first book I finished in April was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J Maas, and that was in that video. I think I read the latter half of this book in that video, I believe. So as a lot of you know, A Court of Silver Flames is kind of the start of the spin-off series from the original Court and Thorns and Roses books. There's an original trilogy there with a little novella in the middle, so they're just here. This is book number 5 in the series, and the main character of this is Nesta, who is Feyre's sister, and Feyre is the main character of the original books. So obviously this is book 5, so I can't really go into the plot in too much detail. The original A Court of Thorns and Roses book is a loose Beauty and the Beast retelling, but make it fae. So it's about Feyre and her family, and they live in the human realm. Feyre accidentally kills a fairy. As punishment, she's kind of taken to the fairy realm, and she has to stay in the spring court with the ruler of that particular court, Tamlin. That's how that story starts, and it changes so much. And Nesta is Feyre's sister, and Nesta is the main character of this. So this is mostly about Nesta and Cassian. It's funny, the plot of this is, I would say, slower until like the last quarter, but I do think that's intentional because Nesta in this book is really recovering from a lot of trauma. And I've said this in a few wrap-ups before, but I really like how Sarah J Maas does trauma. I think she does it realistically. A lot of like fantasy books, characters go through like horrific things but they seem fine at the end, where I feel like with Sarah J Maas, I think she does like trauma and PTSD very well. So Nesta's kind of recovering from that. Her character development in this book is incredible. She really tries to push everyone away, but she's kind of forced basically to get better. She's kind of spending a lot of her time drinking and partying, but her family, they make her train during the day and then work in a library to kind of have a steady routine. So actually a lot of this book is quite repetitive because Nesta's days are quite repetitive, but not in a bad way. I actually thought it was quite realistic. Then towards the end of this book, it has more of a trial element, which I really enjoyed because it definitely harps back to the original first Court of Thorns and Roses book, which I really liked as well. Nesta is quite an unlikable character, but I really enjoyed reading from her point of view. She is quite nasty to people in order to push them away. One thing I'll say about this, making it a bit different, is that the kind of spice level has been amped up. So there is sex scenes in the original books, but it's kind of like made more adult in this one, so just bear that in mind. It is just a little bit more graphic if that's not your thing. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoy the ACOTAR books. I just can't give it a 5-star. I think it's just like a little bit too melodramatic, a little bit too silly, a little bit too predictable. There is just like that element of the books, but they're so enjoyable to read, I think. Yeah, I really liked this, and I liked the main characters changing. I think I was ready for Feyre's story to kind of wrap up and for it to be passed on. I think there's definitely going to be a couple of more. I think there is like slight nods to other couples that the series will maybe continue on with, so I'm excited for that. But yeah, I really loved this. So the next book I read in that same video, I think, is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. So this is book 2 in the Villain series. This is another 4-star for me as well. I did really enjoy it. It was a slight disappointment because the first book was a 5-star for me. I loved that book so much. The first book is about Eli and Victor. In one timeline, they are in university and they're doing a thesis basically on what can create superheroes. They're called extraordinaries in this world. They kind of join together to kind of do experiments on each other to see if they can become EOs. There's a timeline 10 years later where they're sworn enemies and they're out to kill each other. So it's just very interesting going between the 2 timelines and like figuring out what happened between them and who's going to win. I love that it's not like black and white, who's good and who's evil. It's kind of a dark, gritty, Batman-esque superhero villain story. So I really loved the first book, like absolutely loved it. I just thought it was so exciting the whole way through. Very easy and quick to read. This book I also really liked. We have some new characters in this one. However, with this one, I think the timeline jumps I didn't enjoy as much because they were like 4 months ago and then 5 years ago, and then it was kind of all over the place a little bit, and then you have more characters. So I found reading it, I was like, okay, I don't know what this character felt 4 months ago versus 5 years ago. I can't remember. You know, I found it a little bit not hard to follow, but definitely not as, maybe just not as linear to read. So so I don't think that the timeline jumps were as good as the first book. Still really enjoyed it. It's just as exciting, and I love the found family elements of this. I love the characters in it. It's fun trying to figure out what people's powers are. I think when new characters are introduced, you're kind of excited, you know, what is their power going to be? But yeah, really, really good kind of sci-fi superhero series. I think V. Schwab said she is planning on a third book, but there's been no announcements about it yet. I will definitely pick it up when it comes out. So yeah, great stuff. The next one I think is the biggest book I've ever read. This is To Sleep in the Sea of Stars by Christopher Pellini, and this is one big standalone sci-fi book. And again, this was a 4-star read for me. I really, really enjoyed it. It's nearly 1,000 pages. It's like 900 and something, but I actually didn't find that. Like, I found myself just like reading this for hours and like really enjoying it, really getting lost in it, not really looking at the page count that much. It definitely didn't feel as long as it is. This is interesting because I can't really talk about the plot too much without giving too much away, but the main character of this is Kira. It's about 200 years in the future. Humans at this stage have colonized different galaxies. Her and her boyfriend and a group of people, their job is basically to scope out new planets to see if they could be livable in the future. So on kind of just a routine mission, Kira ends up like finding this sculpture. Things kind of happen from there. That's all I can really say. I found this so exciting. I really loved the plot. It is just like a first contact, the earth is in danger type story, but really enjoyable to read. I found this really fun. I think don't let this size and the fact that it's sci-fi intimidate you. I think if you generally like fantasy books, you probably will like this as well. If you like Andy Weir, I didn't find this overly difficult to try to wrap my head around at any point. It had a few weak points. I didn't love the ending and maybe leaned more on fantasy than sci-fi, which I kind of wasn't expecting, but I still liked it. And then I did find sometimes that the characterization in this wasn't too believable, was a bit wooden. There was sometimes I felt like Kira was like a bit emotionless, or maybe just didn't react to certain things the way you'd expect someone to. And then some of the characters felt a bit cartoon-like maybe. That being said, I loved Falcone. Absolutely loved Falcone. The Wallfish's captain. Absolutely loved his character. Though I did like Kira and her character. That's probably just my only gripe with it. With some sci-fi as well, I find sometimes that things can be quite convenient. And I found the same with this book as well. That just like big problems were very easily solved sometimes. But if you like action adventure stories, I would definitely highly recommend it. So this has a prequel as well, and I actually ordered it and it's coming in the post. So I'm excited to read it. I think it's a lot shorter than this. I think it's about different characters. I think a few years before Kira's born, but yeah, really good, really entertaining. I think the story will stick with me for years. Just high stakes, good fun adventure story, which I really enjoyed. So the next book I read was Pachinko by Minjin Lee, and I did read this in my random number generator video, so again I'll link that in the corner. So I have kind of my initial thoughts on this book as well in that video. This was 5 stars. This was so good. That being said, quite a heavy read as well, just because of the subject matter. So it's a historical fiction. This is about Sunja, and she lives in Korea in the early 1900s, and she helps her mum run her boarding house. Sunja actually falls in love with a yakuza, so that's a gangster basically. She ends up getting pregnant, and being pregnant outside of marriage at this time meant you and your family were totally disgraced. One of the men who is staying at the boarding house is a Christian minister, and he agrees to marry Sunja just so her family won't face ruin basically. She agrees, and he has a job lined up in Osaka in Japan. So it's basically about a Korean family trying to settle in Japan. There's a lot about Sunja's mother and then Sunja's children, so it's a bit of a generational book, and some chapters are about some side characters as well, so it's a very holistic kind of character study and really educational. So I learned a lot. Like, I knew Japan colonized Korea at that point, and I knew the divide between North and South Korea was in the 1950s, but I really didn't understand the history around it. So I think this is a really good book if you weren't sure about those things, or you wanted to maybe read a fictional book about it. I definitely think Minjin Lee did her research. She either knew people or she interviewed people. I think she got such a clear picture of what it must have been like at that time, so I'd say she really deep dived. I think she's Korean American herself. A lot of this is quite hard hitting. It's about poverty basically and trying to survive. Then also there's times in Sunja's life where things are going well, but there's still a lot of issues. Her children kind of experience the opposite, but they still have problems as well. So I don't think I full on cried reading this, but I teared up I'd say at least 5 times. So it was interesting to try to binge this book because I don't think it's a very bingeable book. And in the video I was doing, I was trying to read a lot. But yeah, I think it just emotionally kind of got to me. But it was just so excellent. I'm definitely going to see what Minjin Lee publishes in the future. I would love to read her backlist. I think she's incredible. There's a lot of talk about women and their roles, how they're treated, definitely poverty and wealth, kind of the unfairness of colonization and war. The fact that actually a few of the characters are technically from North Korea, but it wasn't North Korea at the time, and then some of them try to go back to North Korea and then the people in Japan never hear from them again. It is just actually kind of crazy how this actually happened. The fact that this isn't fictional, like the characters are fictional, but like the history of it isn't, kind of blew my mind. So I think if you want a little slice of what it probably was really like in Korea and Japan at the time, it was just excellent. You have lots of talks about race and nationality. It was just very human. All the characters felt so real. Like they felt like real people. I felt like I was like watching a history documentary on a real family. I cannot wait to watch the Apple TV adaptation. I think season 2 of it is coming out soon, but I haven't watched any of it yet, so I can't wait to see how they did this. Yeah, it's interesting to see Sunja's children who are Korean but grow up in Japan and the issues they face, and like, is family blood, is family who's there for you. Such good stuff. Quite hard hitting, but in a good way. Okay. This book actually took me forever to read. So this is Throne of the Fallen by Karen Maniscalco. This is a spin-off series of the Kingdom of the Wicked series. I listened to this as an audiobook. I think I just got out of the habit of listening to audiobooks. I'm generally more of a music and podcast person when I'm listening to something. I'm definitely listening to audiobooks a little bit more, so I got this finished. I gave this 3 stars. I quite liked it. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was incredible, but definitely on par with the rest of the Kingdom of the Wicked series. So this is about Prince Envy, and I think Maniscalco is planning a book on each brother. Obviously the original trilogy is about Wrath, so this is about Envy, and I think the next one is Gluttony, and I think that's coming out Halloween time, I think. So the original trilogy is about Amelia and her twin sister. Her twin sister actually ends up being murdered, and Amelia kind of enlists the help of Prince Wrath to try to solve her murder. So the whole trilogy is a little bit like a murder mystery book, where this one's more of a game, like a very high stakes game. Prince Envy and the main female character in this, Camilla, like have very big reasons in order to win this game. So they kind of pair up to help each other. They're kind of forced to work together in a way. But I think this worked very well as a standalone rather than a big series. I think it worked very well. It was in kind of 4 very distinct parts. What I like about this series as a whole is like I can't see anything coming. Any of the twists in any of these books I just didn't guess. I actually thought the original trilogy was a little bit convoluted, like that's maybe why I couldn't get it. Where this one I just think was quite smart. It was just quite good. So yeah, it's quite enjoyable, kind of fantasy romance, maybe dark romance book. I would say this is a romantasy. I would put it in that category. Definitely the romance is a big plot of the book, but also the game. I'd say they're totally 50-50 in importance. Prince Envy basically has an issue with his court. He needs to win this game in order to save his court. Camilla loses something important to her. She definitely has the most mystery around her. She's part of the game without kind of wanting to be, really. But yeah, kind of similar as I would say to the Akatar series. It's a bit over the top. It's a bit too spicy for me. It's a bit silly, but enjoyable, you know, enjoyable kind of romantasy. I think if you liked the original series, you will like this one as well. So yeah, I thought this was good. I couldn't see anything coming. I think the writing is very good. Just maybe this genre of book isn't quite for me, and just a few things being a little bit over the top I think just knocked it a few stars for me, but I think generally it was okay. I liked it enough that I definitely will continue though. I think I definitely will listen to the next book when it comes out. What's fun about this one as well is that it's kind of set in Regency England time, but yeah, hard to follow in times. Okay, the next book, another 5-star, is Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater. So this is the 3rd book in the Raven cycle. And again, it's hard to kind of talk about a book that's a few books into a series because you don't want to spoil anything. What I'm noticing about the Raven cycle is that each book kind of focuses on one of the characters a little bit mostly, while still being multiple POV. So this book I definitely would say is Blue's book. I also found this the most serious one. Like, I found it definitely more eerie and more dark. Actually had like quite scary moments in it, and definitely a little bit more serious in tone than the first 2. Even though they were serious as well, they definitely had some like lightness serious to them as well, where this one was a little bit more on the serious side. All the Raven Cycle books end on a cliffhanger, so I can't wait to get to the Raven King. But yeah, if you don't know, the Raven Cycle is about Blue. She's from kind of this commune of psychics. Blue's told if she kisses her true love, he'll die. So her romantic life is very complicated, as you can imagine. She ends up kind of falling into like the friendship group of these Raven Boys. So they're called the Raven Boys because they go to Eglinby Academy and their symbol is the raven, so they're kind of known as Raven Boys. The kind of main guy in that group is Gansey, and he is trying to find this Welsh king that's sleeping on this ley line. All of his friends have reasons to try and explore this as well. There's a forest in here called Gables that's trying to help them basically wake this king. You have Ronan, who is the kind of the focus of the second book. I really can't say anything about him because that's such a spoiler. Very interesting character. And then you have Adam as well, who is not from the same economic background as the rest of the boys in the school. He's on a scholarship, he's actually from a trailer park, and he's just like working his ass off to make it through school, make it to a good university, and make it in life. And he really doesn't like getting help from anyone. Blue is obviously from lower income family as well, and I found like what's so good about the Raven Cycle is the discussion about wealth, like the discussion of how it affects your family dynamics, how it affects your friendships, even how it affects your pride in ways. I just found it fascinating, like really well done. I really loved Adam's character in this book particularly. He really grows as a character. Gansey as well. I felt like him and Blue were probably the characters that I felt I didn't warm to as quickly as Ronan and Adam, but from this book I like them a lot more now reading this book. But yeah, Blue is basically going through a very tough time. This series is so mythical and magical and very out of the ordinary. The humour is really good. I love Maggie Stiefvater's writing, and it's definitely a character driven story and definitely atmospheric book rather than a plot book, even though I found the plot very interesting too. I know I love them because I'm trying to savor them. I'm literally rationing them. I'm like, oh, I'm sad I only have one more to go, and like I don't want to finish the books quickly. I want to like enjoy my time reading them, so they're a big 5-star series for me. Really loved this as well. I thought I would find one of the books like a bit of a lull or something. I thought I would, but no, they've all been 5 stars so far, and I'm assuming the Raven King will be as well. So I'm so happy I picked the series up. I really love it. I think if you like character stories, I think if you like atmospheric books, you will like it. You definitely have to suspend your disbelief. It is like total fantasy, well set in the real world, so it has a lot of like real life elements as well. So fun, so enjoyable, so unique. Like I've never read anything like this before. It's so out on its own, and I definitely want to read whatever Maggie Stiefvater puts out. I love the friendship dynamics, I love the romantic dynamics, I love the family dynamics, I love the story, I love the writing, I love the humour, I love everything about these books. I love them. So very happy I read this. And here's where we go downhill a little bit, unfortunately. So this is S.D. Gibson's An Education in Malice. So I actually ended up giving this 2 stars, which is quite disappointing because I gave Diary of Blood by the same author 4. I think I gave it a 4. I thoroughly enjoyed that book. This one not so much, which is a pity. And this is actually set in the same universe as A Diary of Blood. It's written very differently because Diary of Blood was, I think it was second person. It was letters to Dracula. The main character of that one was Constanta, and she is basically reflecting back on her time with Dracula and writing her thoughts down and writing her letters to him. This one's third person, it's dual POV. You have Laura and Carmilla, and this is actually a Carmilla retelling. I'm unaware of the original Carmilla story, so I don't know if I would have enjoyed this a bit more if I had. Like, this book was fine. It's not that it was awful or anything like that. I just didn't really enjoy it, and I think the execution of it wasn't done well. I believe the author had great ideas, but they just didn't execute well at all. I think this was so much telling without showing. So much. Like, a good example of that is the main character Laura. She says she wanted to be in the priesthood. She mentions that she's religious, and like in no way, shape or form are we shown that she is at all. Her feelings for Carmilla are just told to you rather than shown again. I also think the author tried too hard to make a dark academia setting. I think she read The Secret History and she was like, okay, what tropes do I include to make this dark academia? I mean, like, that plotting is fun. There's some things that I enjoyed in this book. Laura starting at this university, she's actually very early accepted into this exclusive poetry seminar. Usually first years aren't allowed in this group, but Laura apparently has really good poetry talent. Again, we're told that, not really shown. Carmilla is kind of the teacher's pet in this case, and there's kind of an inappropriate relationship between Carmilla and Professor, and Laura is kind of brought into it. So there's a bit of a rivalry between Laura and Carmilla, but kind of end up banding together. I found this book very tropey. I'm trying a little bit too hard. Definitely wanted to just hit all those dark academia tropes. Definitely wanted to hit all those kind of like romance tropes as well, like academic rivals to lovers. Yeah, just a bit weakly done, I think, which is unfortunate. This is also obviously a vampire story as well, so I did find the vampire elements of this interesting enough. I really didn't like what the author did with La Fontaine as a character. I think you were supposed to kind of sympathize with her, but I didn't want to. I thought Carmilla was interesting enough as a character. I felt like I understood her more. I think because she was a little bit more one-dimensional. Maybe because she wasn't trying to be too multifaceted, I think. Where Laura, I just thought didn't have any character to her. I didn't believe her as a character at all. Again, I just think because we were told what Laura likes and who she is, not shown, just not shown. You know, it's like listing out the ingredients of a cake and you're like, this is a cake, you're like, okay, but I need to taste the cake to know what a cake is. You know, it's a bit like that. It's just a bit weak. I felt like the plotting was okay. I think the strong points of this book are actually just some of the random scenes. Like, I actually quite liked the Halloween scene. I quite liked how Laura and Carmilla banded together. I preferred their story when they were more friends than enemies. But then I think other scenes were kind of put in there just for shock value, just graphic for the sake of graphic. So yeah, this did nothing for me. Unfortunately, I didn't really like it that much. I still do want to read, actually. I have Evocation by the same author, and I actually am excited for this, so I want to give this author another go. But this, unfortunately, I just wish this didn't happen, really. I think A Diary of Blood didn't need another book. It is fun in a way. There's one character that kind of shows up in this one again, but even then, it didn't really add much to the story. I think just the author tried to just mix in a couple of tropes and a couple of ideas together and hoped it worked out, but I just think it didn't, which is unfortunate. But so 2 stars for me, unfortunately. I'm getting into audiobooks a bit more, and I actually ended up listening to Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. I listened to the Rachel McAdams narration, which is on Audible, and I would definitely highly recommend doing that because Rachel McAdams did such a good job. I think the fact that she's Canadian and has a Canadian accent when the book is set in Canada and the characters are Canadian, and of course Rachel McAdams is a great actress as well, so she's very good at bringing the characters to life. But yeah, my expectations for classics are always really high because I'm assuming a classic is going to be a great book. And this was 5 stars for me. I loved this book. It just really took me by surprise by how much I liked it. This book is obviously about Anne Shirley. She is taken in by this brother and sister. They actually sent word to an orphanage that they wanted a boy to help out on the farm, but they ended up with Anne due to some miscommunication. I knew I loved this book when you have the chapter of Matthew picking up Anne and him just like taking her back home, and in his head he's like, oh crap, how will I tell her we were supposed to get a boy? What's Marilla gonna think? But by the end of the journey he falls in love with Anne so much that he's like, no, we need to keep her. And it's just so cute and so wholesome. Just such a lovely book. Again, you can probably tell my taste in this video. Definitely more of a character-based book than plot. Actually, that is probably one gripe I have with the book, is that maybe the middle of the book, a lot of the plot is just kind of Anne getting into trouble, learning her lesson, then we move on. So a lot of the book is like that. You have Anne from ages, I think it's 11 to 16 in the first book. The pacing is interesting because her first year is very detailed, where the rest is kind of a little bit quicker. But I think that is done on purpose because that is how children seem to grow up. They kind of grow up out of nowhere. So I think the pacing of this was quite purposeful. The character development in this is really good. Like Anne herself, she's very romantic, she's very melodramatic, she talks too much, but as she gets older you see her growing up a little bit. Marilla, who's quite harsh, on the outside but very soft-hearted on the inside, starts to kind of show her emotions a bit more. It is really about people changing their minds and growing. I just thought it was excellent. I thought it was just a really good book about love and about friendship and about family. I love Anne as a character, and like, yes, she's a bit annoying, again on purpose. I think Montgomery wanted you to be like, oh yeah, she is over the top, she does talk too much as part of her character, but also I felt like she was quite a unique character. I really liked that she was still like very feminine, like very girly, was very romantic, loves her clothes, but still really ambitious and different and optimistic. She's big into her imagination and romanticizing everything, so I just thoroughly enjoyed her character. This was surprisingly very academic as well. I think if you like academic type books, you will like this, because a lot of this book is Anne in school, her relationships in school, her studying to get into the next school and become a teacher. There's this absolutely lovely, really quite funny rivalry she has with Gilbert. You can tell there's kind of a romance subplot kind of coming up, I'd say, with them. I just love how Anne interacts with her friends. She's very popular and she just gets friends everywhere she goes. Just an absolutely excellent character study book. So I've ordered a box set of all the 8 books. I think there is technically 9 books in the series, but the 9th one is like a collection of short stories. I think it was only released like 10 years ago or something before the author died. So the original 8 are more actual novels, I think. But yeah, I've ordered them. I'm definitely going to keep reading them. Basically, if a book makes me cry, I will give it 5 stars, and this book made me cry. And I was listening to this on the street while I was out for a walk, and I was starting to cry. I was like, oh no, let me get home. So just really, really nice. I think if you like character study books, if you like more wholesome stories, what I loved about this though, it was wholesome, but it wasn't like sickly sweet in any way. It was just very real, very human, real human emotions. Children could read it, but also adults could read it. So that's what I like a good wholesome story that isn't sickly sweet, you know what I mean? But yeah, definitely recommend the Rachel McAdams audiobook as well. If you're going to listen to it, definitely go for that one. Loved it. It was just so good. I definitely am a classics reader. I think it's set on the early 20th century, I think. I think what surprised me is that I thought it would be very cheesy, but it wasn't at all. I think that's what surprised me. It definitely was still wholesome, but it wasn't cheesy. Just real, with a lot of heart, over the top in places, but done on purpose and done well. So loved it. I can't wait to watch Anne with an E on Netflix. I can't wait to read the rest of the books. I'm sad I only got to it now. I wish I read this earlier. But just a beautiful adoption story as well. Just so nice. So definitely highly recommend. That's the last of the books I read. I know that's a lot. I've been talking a long time, but I thought I'd quickly talk about the manga I got to as well. Again, I think I mentioned these briefly in those videos that I mentioned before, but I read Black Butler Volume 4. This is definitely a fun manga series. I am really enjoying it. This is set in Victorian England. So we have this child master of this manor called Earl Phantom Hive. He runs this toy company, but he also works for the crown in ways, and he has this butler called Sebastian, and he's basically this perfect butler, so he can do everything perfectly, and there's other servants in the manor who are really crap. So you've got some like funny panels with Sebastian doing something, you know, crazy, like making a whole feast in 5 minutes, and the other 3 just like messing things up. So the humor in this is actually very good, but it's also quite dark too. It has some very dark tones. I think it's the 2nd or 3rd volume actually has a Jack the Ripper storyline. This volume, volume 4, starts a new storyline, and it's about, I think it's an Indian prince, and he also has a really excellent butler. There's a bit of a rivalry between them. This volume definitely ended on a bit of a, wouldn't say cliffhanger, but definitely just unresolved. So I think this storyline is definitely going to continue for a few volumes. But yeah, fun stuff. I think if you like manga that has like some serious dark tones with some funny tones, it's pretty good. I would say there's definitely some like with manga as well, and the fact that this came out in the noughties, some outdated stuff, some cringy stuff. Nothing that would like totally put you off or anything like that, but just it's a product of its time and culture a little bit. So I thoroughly enjoyed this. Definitely so far they've been like 4 stars for me. They've just been really fun to read. Manga in general I really like to read kind of between books. I think it's a good palate cleanser if you want to read but you're not ready to start a whole new 300-page book. So I think manga's good to get into to just kind of break things up a little bit. Also, I wasn't sure, I was like, how much of Tokyo Ghoul have I read in the past couple of months? And I have read quite a bit. I think I've read from volume 4 up till 10 recently, and that's actually most of the series, because I think there's only 14 in the series. So I am nearly done, and actually volume 10 definitely is, I think, amping up to the end because a lot of the characters are coming together. The pacing of this is very good as well, because definitely the halfway point, volume 7, is when Ken becomes this, basically. Without spoiling, this is the volume that Ken really gets into his ghoul side, would you say? I'll hold up volume 4 just while I talk about it. Tokyo Ghoul is about kind of Tokyo in modern times, and it's divided into different sections, different districts. So ghouls basically appear human, but they actually eat humans. Ken is the main character of the story, and he is the first ghoul human hybrid. That's obviously very complicated. So ghouls kind of live in plain sight a little bit, but also very hidden, and they tend to kind of band together in groups and in the different districts. So there's lots of different like turf wars and stuff. Ken ends up kind of in a good group a little bit that try to eat ethically. Ken has to kind of navigate his own appetite and stuff. So it's a bit like I suppose it's zombie-esque in a way. I think if you like The Walking Dead, you'd probably like this series. Definitely deeper than I was expecting. You have some ghouls who are just children and they're just trying to survive. You have some characters that are in relationships with each other, and one's a human, one's a ghoul. Yeah, there's definitely very interesting philosophical talks. There's a policing system that just want to eradicate all ghouls. So it's definitely Ken and his kind of ghoul group versus the police, basically. And Ken, at this stage in volume 10, is trying to get to the bottom of who created him, basically, or who caused him to become the first hybrid. So I am excited to keep going. I'm really enjoying the series. I think it's very action-packed and fun. I think the story and the plotting is really good. The characters are good. I think again with some manga, some things can be quite cringy in places. Like you'll have a panel and it's just an up-close shot of someone's abs, you know. It's a little bit much in places, but I really enjoy Tokyo Ghoul. It's definitely one of those like darker tone, grittier tone. If you like maybe Death Note and Attack on Titan, it's in that kind of realm. Definitely very violent and gory, so just bear that in mind too. So yeah, if you like The Walking Dead, I think that's probably the most comparable thing I can think about. I think you would really like this, so I am excited to get to the last 4 volumes. There is Tokyo Ghoul RE as well, and I think that's a prequel series with different characters, so I'll see if I get to that. Yeah, really enjoying Tokyo Ghoul. Oh my gosh, I talked forever. Editing this down will be fun. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to subscribe, I do anything book related on this channel. So book reviews like this one, TBR videos, reading vlogs, all that stuff. I'll leave all the videos I mentioned and the books as well that I mentioned in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.